The sun was barely up when Wade Mercer tightened his belt another notch and stared down at the single dollar in his palm. It was a tired, crumpled thing, more lint than currency. But it was all he had left. Just outside the stockyard fence, the air smelled of sun-baked manure, rusted iron, and desperation. Wade fit right in. Rustvale's livestock lot wasn't much more than a dust-choked yard off Highway Spur 9, lined with splintered pens and crooked signage. A beat-up banner overhead read, "Monthly Stock Sale. All creatures sold as is," fluttering like it had given up halfway through the wind. Wade had driven his rickety wagon into town that morning with no expectations and even less hope. He wasn't here for cattle. His grass was dust, his fences were bones, and winter was already biting. But the same whisper that had carried him through war, bad years, and losing Alma still stirred in his gut. Don't give up until the ground takes you. He leaned against the side rail as sellers herded in their lots. The air buzzed with bootsteps and small talk, the crowd mostly ranchers from better patches, men with polished spurs and coin to burn. Wade stayed back, hat low over his brow, until the next round was called in. They brought her in limping. The mare was gray, sun-faded, and slow-moving, with a sway to her gait like she'd survived a dozen rough years. Her ribs stood out beneath a dull coat, and one ear had a notch in it like someone had taken a bite years ago. A few onlookers snorted or turned away. Royce Galloway led her, tall and scarecrow-thin, with a milky film in his left eye that didn't seem to blink. He wore a threadbare coat and boots stitched more with wire than leather. Wade had never seen the man before. "No takers?" the auctioneer asked, his voice dragging through the dust. $1 start? The crowd stayed quiet. One boy laughed, a banker's son, probably. The horse looked barely worth the rope holding her. Wade cleared his throat. $1. The words came out like grit. A few heads turned. Someone muttered, "Poor bastard." The auctioneer barely reacted, just raised his hammer and cracked it down. "Sold. $1. Wade Mercer Royce Galloway met Wade's eyes as he handed over the frayed lead rope. His voice was rough sandpaper. "She's got a secret buried deep," he said, almost too soft to hear. "Let her show you." Wade blinked, caught off guard by the tone more than the words. But Galloway was already turning away, vanishing into the crowd like he'd never been there. Wade loaded the mare, Sage, he'd call her, onto his wagon. She moved without resistance, climbing the ramp with quiet purpose, as if she'd been waiting for this ride her whole life. The road back to Wade's ranch stretched flat and unforgiving, bordered by withered brush and wind-bleached fence posts that leaned like drunkards. Sage rode in silence, staring west with unblinking eyes. Not once did she shift or fuss. It was almost unnerving. The Mercer Ranch sat on 43 acres of scorched land at the base of Sawmill Ridge. Alma had planted bluebells near the porch once, but now even the dirt looked too tired to bloom. The barn leaned harder each year. 2 of his steers had dropped dead last week from bad water, and the bank had sent its third and final notice. 17 days. That's all he had. Wade led Sage into the barn, but she balked halfway through, veering toward the smokehouse, a long-abandoned stone structure behind the chicken yard. She pulled hard, her hooves clattering against the packed earth. Her ears were forward, nose twitching. "You picking up something, girl?" he muttered, letting her guide. Inside the smokehouse, Sage moved with sudden urgency. She began pawing at the far corner, nostrils flared, flanks tense. The floor was dry dirt and cracked concrete. Her hoof struck the same spot again and again. "All right," Wade said slowly, setting the lantern down. "I'm listening." He knelt and scraped the ground with the back of a broken spade, the blade dull, but still sharp enough to cut through topsoil. A few inches down, the metal rang against something harder than earth. He stopped, heart thudding. It was a box, rusted tin, wrapped in oilcloth so stiff it cracked when peeled back. He pulled it free slowly, fingers numb. The latches held, but barely. Inside, nestled among dried cedar shavings, were scrolls of brittle paper, maps, deeds, a worn leather-bound packet of signatures, names he didn't yet understand. That's when he heard the horses. The sound came sudden and sharp, hooves pounding hard and fast against dry dirt. Wade stood, box under one arm, and walked to the barn's side door just in time to see 3 riders appear through the dust. They moved like men with a purpose, their eyes scanning, hands near holsters. Leading them was Sheriff Clay Danner, his silver star catching the last rays of sunlight. The 2 men behind him wore no badges, just cold eyes and tight jaws. Wade stepped out into the light, the box still tucked beneath his coat, and braced himself. Sheriff Danner raised a hand, his smile tight as a noose. "Evening, Wade. Mind if we talk?" Wade didn't answer. Not yet. The last warmth of the day slipped below the ridge, and a hard wind rolled across the yard. He had a feeling this was the beginning of something big and bad. Wade didn't answer right away. He stepped forward slowly, the tin box pressing against his ribs like a secret trying to claw its way out. Sheriff Clay Danner dismounted, brushing dust off his coat with a kind of smug composure that said this wasn't a social call. The 2 men behind him stayed mounted. They weren't locals, at least not any Wade had seen at Rustvale's feed store or Sunday meetups. Their posture was tight, their eyes scanning the barn, the smokehouse, the mare in the yard. "You've got yourself a horse," Danner said casually, jerking his chin toward Sage. "And word is, she ain't yours." Wade kept his voice steady. "Paid for her this morning, at the lot on Spur 9, $1 even." Danner's brow arched. "That's so?" The taller of the 2 strangers, a man with a thick neck and a pistol low on his thigh, spat a stream of tobacco to the dirt. "Only problem with that story, Mr. Mercer, is that Royce Galloway's been dead 2 days. Wade blinked. "That's not possible. He's the one who handed me the lead rope. Wore a patchy coat, looked half-starved. Found him face down in the arroyo behind Salt Creek," the other man added. "Bullet in the back. Coyotes had a go at his boots." Danner let that hang in the air like a noose. "So you see the problem. A dead man can't sell you a horse, which means you're holding stolen property, friend." Wade fought to keep his hands from twitching. "If there's a problem, take it up with the auctioneer." "There was no auction today," Danner said flatly. "Hasn't been one in a week. Old man Harper's been laid up with fever and the lot's closed." The air thickened. Sage let out a short, sharp snort from behind the barn, as if she could feel the temperature dropping too. "Look, Sheriff," Wade said slowly. "This mare, she led me to something in the smokehouse, something buried." That was a mistake. All 3 men straightened subtly. Danner's fingers twitched near his belt. "Is that right?" Wade didn't elaborate. He couldn't tell them about the contents of the tin box, not yet. He needed time and a place to think. Whatever was buried had been meant to stay that way. And yet, Sage had known. She'd pawed that ground like she was uncovering a grave. The box, the deeds, the signatures. None of it made sense yet. But it was important. That much was clear. "Maybe you ought to let us take the mare," Danner said with that rehearsed lawman's drawl. "And whatever you found with her, save you some trouble." Wade didn't move. She's mine by purchase, and what I found's on my land." The man with the thick neck laughed, low and humorless. "Everything out here belongs to someone bigger than you, Mercer." "Enough talk," Danner cut in. "You've got until sundown tomorrow to bring that horse and whatever you dug up to my office. You don't, we come back, and next time, we don't talk." Wade nodded once, not agreeing, just acknowledging. The three men turned, mounted, and rode off in a cloud of dust. Back inside the house, Wade laid the tin box on the kitchen table and opened it under the dim light of an oil lamp. The documents inside were yellowed but intact. Land plats, hundreds of acres marked in careful ink. Names scratched in elegant script. Ranchers, surveyors, government clerks. Attached to one parchment was a seal, the territorial stamp, cracked but still legible. United States Land Office, 1879. He flipped through the stack and paused when a name jumped out at him. Samuel Galloway, Royce's last name. Royce's Ahe. The packet included tribal land assignments, property deed transfers, even a ledger of payments made in gold and cattle. The math told the story better than any words. Entire tracts of land sold for pennies on the dollar, then flipped to the railroad consortiums at enormous profit. Many of the original owners had names that were Spanish or indigenous. Their signatures were shaky or replaced with thumbprints. Wade sat back in his chair, breath caught in his throat. This wasn't just some bad deal or clerical mistake. It was organized theft, systematic and ruthless. Someone had used Sage to guard these records or hide them, maybe both, and whoever had buried them didn't want them found. Sage was outside, pacing again. He rose, grabbed the lantern, and stepped back into the night. The wind had picked up, whispering through the rafters. Sage stood near the smokehouse again, ears forward, pawing at the dirt with more urgency than before. "You trying to tell me there's more?" Wade whispered. She snorted, then struck the ground again. Wade crouched and swept his hands across the area. Another loose board. The ground underneath was cracked and shallow. He dug with his bare hands until his nails ached. Another tin container, smaller, heavier. He dragged it out and wiped it clean. Inside were more documents, this time signed affidavits, all notarized. Letters, personal accounts from tribal leaders, soldiers, railroad workers, and one small journal entry, dated November 7th, 1881, from someone named S.G. "They killed Luis tonight. Said he knew too much about the eastern parcels. Danner helped cover it. I have to hide the proof. Sage will keep watch." Wade's hands shook. S.G. Samuel Galloway. And Danner. That name again. There wasn't just fraud in this box. There were names carved into the bones of the territory itself. Galloway had hidden the truth. Sage had been trained, or maybe just learned, to guard it. And Danner, if it was the same family line, had helped bury it all. The sound of hooves outside snapped him back to the moment. But there was no one. Just Sage, now calm, staring into the trees. Wade looked at the moonlight flickering on the second box and realized something chilling. The truth had waited a long time, and it had chosen him. Wade barely slept. He sat in his kitchen through the cold hours before dawn, oil lamp flickering, both boxes open before him like coffins holding the truth. Each document was another nail in someone's grand lie. Fraudulent land deeds, military survey maps altered by hand, logs of gold payoffs, and names. So many names, some he recognized. Big families who owned sprawling ranches across the Rust Vale Basin. Others were initials scrawled next to payoff entries, CD, WH, SG, initials that now held weight like dynamite. And always, threaded like a snake through the records, was that same dark truth. Land meant for tribes, widows, and war veterans had been stolen, piece by piece, reshaped into empire. By the time the sun cracked over the eastern hills, Wade knew two things for certain. He needed help, and he was being watched. The movement started slow, a shadow just outside his window before sunrise. A rider off in the distance, near the dry creek bed, who didn't move for 10 straight minutes. A glint from the ridge above the chicken yard, like someone adjusting a scope. Sage stood just inside the smokehouse, her body rigid, her ears never at ease. She knew too. By mid-morning, Wade hitched up his old wagon and loaded the documents into a sealed flour sack. He didn't bother hiding it. No point anymore. He pulled on his coat, took one long look at Sage, and said, "I'll be back. You keep breathing." She bobbed her head once. Rustvale wasn't much of a town, a dusty main street with a general store, a post office, and a chapel whose bell hadn't rung in years. The courthouse sat like a box of bones on the hill above it all, half-painted and surrounded by mesquite. Wade tied off his horse behind the feed store and made his way down Main Street. He felt it instantly, the eyes, the watchful kind. Folks who normally waved kept walking. Two men on a bench outside the barber's shop stopped talking when he passed. He caught a flicker of movement in the reflection of the saloon's window. A man adjusting his coat to show the butt of a pistol. They knew. Sheriff Danner hadn't waited until sundown. He needed to get to the only person left with any real authority in the territory not tied to cattle or corruption, Judge Helen Stroud. A war widow with iron in her spine and silver in her hair. She lived above her old law office on the edge of town. Folks said she hadn't taken a bribe since the day she buried her husband. Wade found her seated on her porch, sipping black coffee and reading a law journal. "Morning, Mr. Mercer," she said without looking up. "You look like hell." "Been there," he replied. "Got something you need to see?" She tilted her chin, catching the grim set of his face. "Better not be another claim to water rights. I've had my fill of pipe dreams and dried-up springs." "It's not water," Wade said, handing over the flour sack. "It's the whole damn foundation of this town." Judge Stroud set down her coffee and opened the sack. Her eyes scanned the first few pages. She stopped on a land plat with an altered stamp, then moved to a journal entry signed S.G. She didn't speak for a long time. Then she said, "You mailed copies?" "Not yet. Was hoping you'd tell me where they'd actually get seen." She nodded once. "Denver, Federal Marshal's office, and fast." Wade looked out across the town. "You think they'll let that happen?" Judge Stroud followed his gaze. "Not without trying to stop you." That night, the barn burned. The fire started fast, likely soaked in kerosene, judging by the way it screamed into the sky. Wade was jolted from his cot by Sage's panicked whinny. Louder, wilder than he'd ever heard. By the time he reached the door, the night was orange. The wind carried ash and heat toward the house as Sage reared against the fence line, eyes wide, smoke curling around her legs. Wade sprinted barefoot across the dirt, unlatched her pen, and slapped her flank. "Run, damn it, go!" She bolted, vanishing toward the ridge. Wade turned back and saw flames devouring the barn roof. Everything inside was gone: tools, seed stock, feed. But he didn't care. He'd moved the documents to the root cellar hours ago. Still, the message was clear. They were done asking. By dawn, nothing remained but cinders and a charred iron hinge. Wade stood over the wreckage, fists clenched. The ground was black and still smoking. Across the ashes, something glinted. A brass object. He stepped forward and picked it up. A surveyor's compass, half buried in the dust, its face cracked but still readable. etched on the side, barely visible through the soot. SG-US Department of Interior. Samuel Galloway, the man who'd written the journal entries, the man who'd documented the land thefts, and if the rumors were true, the man who'd vanished without a trace 7 years ago. They hadn't just killed for land. They'd killed to silence him. And yet somehow, his work had survived, buried with the one creature left who remembered where the truth had been hidden. Sage. Wade looked to the hills, wondering if she was still out there, hiding, watching. He whispered, "They thought they buried you, but you left a trail." By the next morning, word had spread. Somehow, even without a newspaper, everyone in Rustvale seemed to know something had happened at the Mercer place. No one offered help. No one asked questions. But everyone watched Wade a little closer. He loaded the second box, wrapped the documents in oilcloth, and carried the compass in his coat. He mailed copies of the evidence to Denver. 6 separate packages sent to different offices and addresses. 1 to the Marshal's Bureau, 1 to a former Pinkerton, 2 to newspapers, 1 to a senator's office, and the last to Judge Stroud's own archives. Then he went home, grabbed his rifle, and waited. Because he knew they were coming. And next time, they wouldn't be satisfied with burning wood. The sky was the color of iron when they came. Wade had spent the day fortifying what little he had left. The barn was gone, but the root cellar held the remaining documents, and he'd barricaded the front of the house with overturned furniture, grain sacks, and a makeshift barricade of timber boards nailed crosswise. His old Winchester sat across his lap. He'd cleaned it twice just to keep his hands from shaking. By late afternoon, he heard them. Horses. 6 of them, slow and deliberate. Hooves crunching dry gravel along the edge of the dry creek bed. The same 2 men from before rode in on either side of Sheriff Clay Danner, their expressions stone hard. Behind them were 3 more riders Wade didn't recognize, but he knew their kind. Mercenaries, or worse. Men who did bad things for good money and asked no questions about either. They came up to the yard like they owned it. "Mercer," Danner called, pulling his horse to a halt. "Let's not make this harder than it needs to be." Wade stood in the doorway, rifle in hand, eyes calm. "Don't plan to." Danner nudged his horse forward a few paces, raising his voice so all could hear. "You've got property that don't belong to you, and a mare that does. We're here to collect both." Wade shook his head slowly. "You're here to bury what that mare dug up. But it's too late. The truth's already moving." One of the gun hands muttered something to Danner, who didn't take his eyes off Wade. "Look, you hand it over, we walk away. You keep pushing this. Well, I can't guarantee what happens next." From behind a twisted pine at the edge of the property, a familiar figure emerged on horseback. It was Judge Helen Stroud, wearing a flat-brimmed riding hat and a long duster, reins in one hand and a lever-action carbine resting across her saddle horn. Flanking her were a dozen riders, men and women from Rustvale, most of them older, their faces carved by time and drought. Ranchers, blacksmiths, field hands. Folks Wade hadn't expected to lift a finger, but they were here, and every last one of them was armed. "Sheriff Danner," Judge Stroud called out, "you're conducting an armed operation on private property without a warrant. Explain yourself." Danner turned his horse slowly, his voice losing its charm. "This man is holding stolen documents and a horse tied to a federal investigation." "That's so?" she said, dismounting with a stiffness born from years in the saddle. "Then you'll show me that investigation paperwork right now." Danner didn't move. "That's what I thought," she said. Step aside. One of the hired men nudged his mount toward the barn. He didn't make it 2 steps before a blur of gray muscle slammed into him from the side. Sage. She erupted from the tree line like a cannonball. Hooves flying, nostrils flared, teeth bared. The hired man's horse reared in terror as Sage barreled into him. The man cried out and tumbled backward, his rifle flying from his hands. Danner shouted, "Get the damn horse!" Another gun hand raised his pistol, but Wade had already leveled his rifle and fired. The shot cracked through the dry air and hit the man's saddle just inches from his thigh. The warning was clear. The next shot would find flesh. Sage circled back, placing herself squarely between Danner's men and the porch. She pawed the ground, her snorts loud and threatening. Judge Stroud seized the moment. She pulled a leather-bound packet from her saddlebag and held it up. "These are sworn affidavits, original plats, and documentation of land fraud going back over 20 years. Names include officials in the land office, railroad agents, and yes, Sheriff Clay Danner." A murmur rippled through the townsfolk behind her. Several riders dismounted and stepped forward, guns drawn but lowered. Danner's face darkened. "You think anyone outside this town gives a damn? You think Denver's gonna care what some dead surveyor wrote?" Stroud's voice was iron. "They'll care because I've already mailed it, and because this territory's foundation is cracking, and you're standing at the fault line." Danner drew. He was fast, but not fast enough. 3 rifles swung toward him, their shots echoing like thunderclaps. The sheriff's hat went flying, his revolver dropping to the dust before he could even aim. His horse bucked and bolted, and Danner hit the ground hard, clutching his shoulder. One of the mercenaries turned to run, but Wade fired again, this time into the air. "Move, and we finish this now," Wade said, stepping off the porch. "Every one of you." Judge Stroud walked over to Danner, kicked his pistol away, and crouched beside him. "You're under arrest for conspiracy, corruption, destruction of evidence, and attempted murder. If you resist, we'll bury you out here with the others you tried to silence." Danner groaned, blood darkening his coat sleeve. "You'll regret this." "I already regret not acting sooner," she muttered. Sage walked slowly to Wade's side, her breath heavy but calm now. He rested a hand on her neck, whispering, "You weren't done fighting after all, huh?" The gray mare nuzzled him gently, and Wade felt a tremor pass through his chest. Not fear, not anger, but release. The kind that came after years of silence finally cracked open. One by one, the townsfolk stepped forward and surrounded the house. They'd come to see if the stories were true. Now they'd witnessed it for themselves. And no one was going to bury the truth again. The news spread faster than wildfire. By the next morning, federal marshals had arrived in Rustvale, summoned by Judge Stroud's telegraph sent the moment she left Wade's ranch. Within 24 hours, the town changed. Danner was in custody. His 2 enforcers were arrested without incident at the watering hole south of town. The 3 mercenaries that had accompanied them vanished before sunrise, their horses found abandoned outside a canyon ridge. Wade stood on his porch, arms crossed, watching a procession of dusty wagons rumble past. Inside them, bundled and sealed, were the 2 tin boxes, now in the hands of Deputy Marshal Eli Graves, a quiet man with a mind like a ledger and eyes that missed nothing. Graves had spent half the night in Wade's kitchen, thumbing through every page by lantern light, pausing only to shake his head or curse under his breath. He didn't say much, but when he reached the final ledger, the one detailing payoffs to key officials in the territorial government, he let out a long, low whistle. "This isn't just a land scam," he said finally. "This is the kind of thing that topples governors." It did. Within weeks, Governor Harlan Trask of New Mexico Territory was named in federal documents leaked to the press. The allegations weren't just about land. They included bribery, obstruction, and the systematic displacement of entire Native communities through forged deeds and falsified court rulings. The railroad consortium at the heart of the scandal collapsed. Their stocks plummeted, executives fled. Some were arrested. Others simply vanished. Wade never saw any of them again. What he did see, though, and what truly stayed with him, was the slow, painful resurrection of truth in the soil beneath his boots. 3 weeks after the standoff, representatives from the Mescalero Apache tribe rode out to the Mercer Ranch. They were quiet, respectful. Their elders carried no flags, no fanfare, only old maps and solemn faces. One of them, an elderly woman named Naomi Redbird, placed a wrinkled hand on Wade's kitchen table and whispered, "My grandfather's land sat right where your house is now. He never sold it. He just disappeared." Wade said nothing, just handed her a cup of coffee and the original deed with her grandfather's name scrawled in weathered ink. Ezekiel Redbird, 1880. She stared at it for a long time before tears found her eyes. They didn't demand the land back. They didn't threaten legal action. Instead, they brought forth a signed letter from a federal adjudicator, a gift of clear title and mineral rights to Wade Mercer, in gratitude for his role in exposing the fraud and helping return thousands of acres to their rightful owners. "You didn't steal from us," Naomi said. "You gave our voices back." Wade wanted to argue, to say he hadn't done much. But he didn't, because truthfully, he'd nearly burned the evidence twice, nearly walked away from all of it. If not for that horse. Sage stood outside the kitchen window, grazing calmly in the shade of the remaining oak. She'd earned that peace. The land changed slowly, but it changed. Where the barn had burned, Wade and the townsfolk built a monument, nothing fancy. Just a flat stone with the names of those whose land had been stolen, and a carving of a horse in profile, her head turned west. They called it the Red Line Memorial, after the infamous map uncovered in the second box that showed a red boundary slashed through all the illegally claimed land. Judge Stroud stayed on the bench another 2 years, long enough to see every last indictment handed down. When she finally retired, Wade gave her the surveyor's compass they'd found in the ashes. "You're the only one who knew which direction to walk," he'd told her. She'd smiled and said, "It wasn't me. That old gray mare did the leading." Sage lived 3 more years. She never wandered far again. After the chaos, the fire, and the blood, she seemed content to graze in silence. Wade rebuilt the barn and left the west side open for her to come and go as she pleased. Some evenings, he'd catch her staring at the smokehouse, just standing there like a sentinel, as if making sure no one tried to bury truth in that place again. When she passed, quietly, in her sleep under the old juniper tree behind the ridge, Wade dug the grave himself. He buried her wrapped in Alma's old quilt, the one she used to keep on the porch swing during late autumns. He laid the rusted tin box beside her, empty now, but symbolic. And on top, he placed a smooth stone carved with one word, Sage. The woman from the Mescalero tribe returned a week later, bringing with her a blessing song and a small pouch of red earth from her grandfather's village. She sprinkled it across the grave and said, "Even the animals know justice when they see it." Years passed. The Mercer Ranch became a modest but thriving operation, not because Wade struck it rich, though the mineral rights did bring in some money, but because the soil itself seemed lighter. Crops grew better, animals stayed healthier. Travelers came and went, some just to see the memorial, others to speak with Wade about cold cases, land disputes, or buried truths of their own. He helped where he could, wrote letters, mailed maps, shared stories. He never bought another horse. Didn't need to. Some nights, when the wind came low over the ridge and the stars were bright enough to see every scar on the land, he'd sit on the porch and think about the moment he spent that last dollar. How foolish it had seemed. How desperate. How necessary. That dollar had bought him more than a horse. It had bought him redemption, peace, and purpose. He'd once believed justice belonged to men with badges and robes. Now he knew better. Sometimes it arrived on 4 shaky legs, with a graying coat and eyes full of memory. And sometimes the most broken-looking things carried the greatest treasures. So the dust settled in Rustvale, but the echoes of truth remain. If you were captivated by this journey, give it a like, won't you? And to keep unraveling the wild mysteries of the American West with us, just hit subscribe. What's one secret you think the West is still hiding? Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.